Hi, thanks everyone for joining in. Excited to have Alison Stuart joining us. So, for those who might know, Alison's actually been an author for the day in our group, so it's good to have Alison back again. Thanks for joining us again, Alison.
Oh, thank you very much for the invitation. I had such fun being author of the day. I got into quite a conversation about, and it's given me a whole new idea for my next Singapore Singapore book, actually,
Oh,
which
okay, well that's
came out
great
of
to
that today,
hear.
which was
I've heard from a
and
few
inspired.
authors that our groups have given them good ideas for next books,
Yeah.
so that's really good to hear. So just a little bit about Alison. So Alison writes historical romances and short stories set in England and Australia and across different periods of history. She is best known for The Postmistress and The Gold Miner's Sister, stories set in the Victorian goldfields in the 1870s. She also writes historical mysteries as A.M. Stuart, and her popular Harriet Gordon mystery series is set in Singapore in 1910. She lives in Melbourne with her husband and a geriatric cat. And in a past life, Alison worked as a lawyer across a variety of disciplines, including the military and emergency services. She's lived in Africa and Singapore, and when circumstances permit, travels extensively, all for research, of course.
Of course.
And hopefully that will be something we can all do again soon.
Hopefully, yes.
And I just want to mention as well that I've recently listened to the audio of The Postmistress and really, really loved it. We were talking about the narrator was great and yeah, was really, really great for The Postmistress.
Yeah, we were just chatting about that before we went live, and she's a fabulous narrator. And I was listening to them, and totally forgot they were my own
Mm.
books. So I was completely in love with the hero of The Postmistress by the end of it. I thought, oh, hang on, I wrote him. My invention. But no, I don't set my narrators a very easy task because I give them all these strange accents to do, and they get even
Yeah.
stranger when I get into the Singapore books, of course.
Yeah.
But get a good narrator and they do a fabulous job.
Yeah, that's right. They can really make a book as well. Yeah. Um, Thanks. So again, thanks so much for joining us. Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a little bit more about your books. And like I said before, you write under two different names. Maybe tell us the difference between the two different ones as well.
Okay, probably go back a little bit. I was writing historical romances as Alison Stuart for quite a long time. And the definition of madness being to go on doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I decided I really needed to change my tack a little bit. And my husband and I went camping up on the Snowy River, and it was raining, and we had nothing else to do except sit under the tent canopy with a bottle of red. And I said to him, well, if I was to write a story set in Australia, Victorian goldfields, for example, what do you think we could do? And so between the two of us, we kind of brainstormed the basic concept of the Maidens Creek stories on that rainy afternoon with a bottle of red. And I wanted a series. I wanted a small town series. I didn't want to look at the Bendigo, Ballarat goldfields because they're just too big for what I was wanting. But I really wanted to try my hand at doing a small town with continuation characters that ran through all the books. There's 3 books in the series. I'm just writing the 3rd one at the moment. And maybe a different hero and heroine featuring up front. So that was the background to not quite finished that story yet, in that the one place I knew really well that I felt would really tick the box is a little town called Walhalla. Which is in, you've lived down here, you probably know it, West Gippsland, but it's tucked right up into the mountains. And it was a very, very successful goldfield towards the end of the 19th century. And it's a place. It's our go-to place. We've been camping there for 40 years, and nowadays camping in the hotel, which is a little bit more comfortable. But
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was a place that you knew well.
yeah, it was, and Yeah, so if people know Walhalla, they will recognise quite a lot of Walhalla in Maidens Creek. I was sort of saying to a friend the other day, I should probably start running Maidens Creek tours up to Walhalla.
Yeah.
Oh, this is the post office. This is the mine, because they're based very closely on what is still extant in Walhalla. So that's the background to the Australian stories, and the Singapore ones are slightly different in that I lived in Singapore, as you said, for 3 years as a trailing spouse, as they call them. It was my husband's job that took us up there, and I was hanging around in the National Library looking at microfishes just to sort of get an idea of what life in colonial Singapore was like. And I happened to cross this advertisement for a shorthand typist who guaranteed absolute secrecy and confidentiality. Genuine advertisement from the 1905 Straits Times. And she stayed with me for a long time, and gradually she sort of morphed into this protagonist for a historical mystery series. Completely the opposite to the Maidens Creek series, in that in this situation, I wanted continuation characters across a series of books. So Harriet Gordon is the protagonist, the shorthand typist who guarantees absolute secrecy and confidentiality. And she has as is the sort of the trope with all these historical mysteries, has the professional policeman on hand to sort of work to bounce off, who is Inspector Robert Curran. So those are my Singapore books. So quite different. My husband says it's getting very crowded in bed.
So the Singapore book, are they what nationality is the lady there?
Colonial. They're colonial English.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, Singapore Sapphire is the first one. Revenge in Rubies.
Great to see. Yeah.
Second one, and the third one, Evil in Emerald, is coming out in March next year. But yeah, no, I was basing it. Again, that was sort of drawing a little bit on my own experience of being brought up in what was still colonial Africa in the early 1960s. So again, that's sort of a lot of my own experience has sort of come into that. My father's experience as a soldier in Singapore and Malaya, particularly in Revenge in Rubies, which is the military story. So sort of drawn quite a bit on my own background for those stories.
Yeah,
and mostly to show that there's good and bad in every society, and colonials tend to be portrayed universally as bad these days, and I just wanted to show they weren't all like that. They weren't like nice people.
Yeah, and the same publicist, is it, or
no, completely different publishers. The Australian ones were published by HarperCollins here in Australia, and it was the Singapore ones were picked up by Penguin USA.
Okay,
it was a really bad case of be careful what you wish for, because I decided at the beginning of 2017 to give up the day job and try my hand to writing full time, and kind of quite a long story short, ended up within a matter of months with not one but two major print published contracts for 2 books each, both wanting the same time frames.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. 2 different publishers. How do you handle the demands of each? Because I'm sure they're both putting their deadlines and
negotiating deadlines was the biggest challenge. But I guess coming from a corporate background too, I sort of go, all right, this is a project. No different from any other project. We can do this, and so here's the Gantt chart. Let's go with this. And I mean, I guess Melbourne being shut down for the last 2 years, has provided me with few distractions in that sense. But the downside of that is, of course, all my books have been released into shut down Melbourne, so I haven't seen them on shelves. Or unfortunately, the American ones aren't readily available here in Australia. They're not on general distribution, but you can get them if you just ask the local bookshop. They'll get them in for you.
Yeah. And you were a lawyer and now an author. How did that come about?
Well, I think I've always been an author between you and I and the Gatepost. And I think from my school days when my best friend and I sat halfway up a willow tree in the school playground writing stories, that was really what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, ever practical Capricorn, you don't earn money doing that. So I decided, and then my father kept saying, you need to go to trade. And as I fainted at the sight of blood and I couldn't add up, that ruled out medicine and accounting. So, yes, it's been a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun being a lawyer, as you probably gathered. I obviously have a thing for men in uniform, so I've been lucky to be able to not be a sort of the corporate lawyer type thing, but actually work for interesting places.
Yeah, yeah. So at what point did you decide that you were going to give up your career and become a full-time writer?
Well, to a certain extent, the career gave up on me. In that, the more senior you are, the sharper the blade of the axe that falls. So I found myself sort of retrenched from my last full-time job, and so I puddled around in part-time working for a disability organisation, which I just loved, but. I just got a sense that there was something about the Singapore books that I really wanted to pursue. I sort of felt that it was there if I wanted it. I just had to sort of reach out and get it. And I mean, you reach a certain age, and financially, my husband and I sat down, did the sums, and yes, we didn't have to live on my salary anymore. So that was that decision made for me, really.
And how did you go about getting your first book published, and how hard or easy was that?
I should probably preempt this by saying that I have actually been publishing books since 2007. I think was my first book, which was back when ebooks first came out, and there was nothing. I had an e-publisher in the US who took The King's Man, was my first published, and it was so exciting. I was going to be published. Unfortunately, back in those days, they didn't have such things as e-readers. So it was all very well having an e-book out, but very few people could read it. So, a sort of combination of some small publishers in the US and a bit of indie publishing. But as I said, the definition of madness is to go on doing the same thing. How easy was it? I was very lucky in that Harlequin Australia did pick up my earlier three of my backlist, and they published them under Escape, which again was a digital arm of Harlequin. But I think through that contact, I was able to sort of then pitch the Australian books to them. In fact, I pitched the Singapore Sapphire to them, and the editor rang me to sort of say, "Oh, I really love it, but yeah, not really what we're looking for. Have you got anything else?" And this is literally the week after I got back from that camping trip. And I said, well, funny that. Here's a story. And that was all I had, was just a pitch. And they said, well, send us in two synopses for 2 books and some sample chapters, and we'll see where we go. So I was effectively commissioned to write those 2 books, which is really unusual for basically a first time traditional published writer. But I guess they knew I could deliver, and they knew my style of writing, so I guess that made it a bit easier for them to make that decision. But yeah, I mean, I'm a pantser, so to be asked to write synopses for 2 books I hadn't even written, was a huge challenge. But I did it. I did it. The finished books look nothing like what I sent in.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So that was those books, and then I went off to America, and I pitched the Singapore books to an agent at the Historical Novel Society conference in Portland, Oregon, and she picked me up. And she was the one who sold the Harriet Gordon stories for me to Penguin. So it all sounds incredibly easy, but effectively it took me 25 years to get there.
Yeah. And we've got a few people watching and some questions coming through, which is good.
Excellent, throw them in.
Sharon wonders what genre you like to read, and do you have any recommendations for us?
Really good question, that, because I was, name dropping. I was talking to Mary Jo Putney at she'd come out for an RWA conference, and I don't know how we got onto this topic, and I was sort of moaning about the fact that nobody wanted to read English Civil War stories, and she said to me, "Well, what do you actually read?" And it put me a bit on the back foot because what I actually read is crime. I don't read an awful lot of romance books. I love crime stories, and that I think started me thinking about, well, could I write a crime story? Very different, very different discipline to writing a romance story. And to be perfectly honest, that's actually probably what I still read. And when I say read, I actually mean listen, because I do, well, particularly when I was working, I used to do all my reading in the car on the commute.
Yeah.
Love audiobooks. And I still take every opportunity. So recommendations for historical mysteries. I have just finished, I can't, it's very unusual for me to say, there's a series I read in that she can't write them fast enough for me, and they're the most delightful, whimsical, cozy mysteries, and they just have made me feel good all this year. And it's an author by the name of Karen Menuhin, Menuhin.
I haven't heard it.
She's related to Yehudi Menuhin, and she writes this series called the Heathcliff Lennox books. And they are classic. They're classic cozy mysteries. You know, there's the manor house and there's the castle in Scotland, and I think it's actually the narrator of the audio books who just brings these characters to life in the most amazing way. And I'm literally sort of ready on the pre-order button whenever the next one comes in. So they've been my main reading this year for those. C.S. Harris's Sebastian Santhea stories are they're an auto buy for me as well every year. So those on the historical mystery side, that's my recommendations for this year. Were you after other recommendations for?
No, they sound, they're great recommendations. Thank you. Belinda wonders if you have a favourite character to write.
Anyone who's read a range of my stories, and I've got 14. I think I'm up to 14 published books. You might notice I have a thing about men in uniform. I think I have only written one hero who's never been a soldier, and that's actually the hero of The Gold Miner's Sister.
Okay.
It's actually a very funny story as to why he's an engineer. So I do like a soldier, and I do like a wounded hero too. I'm very fond of torturing my heroes, either physically or mentally. So that tends to be a sort of a bit of a theme through all my books. Is I'll fall back on my wounded heroes.
Yeah. And a bit more to that question as well that I'd like to know. If you could be one of your characters for a day, who would you choose to be and why?
Oh, I'm so mean to my characters. Why would I want to be anyone? I really put them through hell. Look, I think of all my characters, I think the closest one to me is probably Harriet Gordon, my Singapore story, my Singapore heroine. There's a lot of me in Harriet, and also, and I mean, I've given her a pretty bad time too. I've killed off her husband, I've killed off her child, I've stuck her in prison being force-fed as a suffragette, but she's okay now. She's all right now. As I said, I think of all of them, Harriet is the closest to me as myself.
Yeah.
Good question.
And could you tell us a bit more about the research you do? You must do a lot of research being historical. The English Civil War was really easy to write about because I've lived and breathed. It's been my passion all my life. So that's second nature to me now. And in fact, most of the books on that bookshelf behind me are my research books for the English Civil War. So when I started researching Australian books, I realised, despite the fact, I know Victoria really well, I know Walhalla really well, I know, I thought I knew gold mining really well, knew nothing. I knew nothing. And I am fortunate to be married to an engineer. Now, if anybody is married to an engineer, you will understand that they are God's gift to the world. So they know everything about everything, and particularly my gold mad husband. And so, of course, I was able to use him as a most amazing resource, a research resource. I said to him, what's it, the quartz thing where they find the gold, what's that called? Alison. It's called an extruded swarming dike. Oh, okay.
Don't think I've got to put that in a romance novel. So that's the kind of level of detail he had. Again, with my Australian books, Trove, the going back through the old newspapers, you get a good sense of what was going on. Of course, I picked up the most amazing little stories from there that appear in the books, like the smallpox victim and the death of the doctor on the coach. They're all based on true stories. And, the practical things, I'm very blessed that I have Sovereign Hill just up the road. And so I took myself off on a day trip to Sovereign Hill without anybody else. So I could do exactly what I wanted. And of course, I found all these amazing volunteers who run the gold extruding there, who are only too happy to talk at length about how they extruded the gold from the rocks as they came through. Oh, come on to the floor, let me show you. And these are the beds of mercury, and more information than I needed. But so that's how I researched those ones. And the Singapore ones, of course, well, I lived in Singapore for 3 years, so I had assumed a lot of information, and again, libraries and again, I go through their equivalent of Trove, the National Archives, and I just devour the Straits Times. That gives me so much information, and I'm very blessed. I've got travel guides for Singapore and Malaya. Train. I can tell you the train timetables. I can tell you everything about that. And as I said, again, a lot of it just comes from my intrinsic fact of having lived there. I know how it smells. I know how it feels to live in that humidity. So that is the research. But the thing with research is not to get bogged down in it. Do enough to get myself started, and then if I'm come across something that does need researching, particularly in a rough draft, I'm more likely to just make a note to myself that I need to know a little bit more about this, and I'll just try and move on. And then quite often when I've gone back, I haven't needed that piece of information, which I could have spent a whole afternoon researching. I have to be a little bit selective. I think good research is like a spice to be used sparingly throughout. So it's not obvious. Here's everything I know about Paris in the 18th century.
And is there anything that you can share with us that you've found during your research that's really surprised you that may not be in your books?
That isn't in the books. Well, I think I can't think of anything that hasn't. The thing that really surprised me, that really absolutely rocked my socks, was that information about the smallpox victim which appears in the Postmistress. So those who haven't read the book, it's about a woman who comes to the town with smallpox and how the town deals with having that risk, because of course smallpox in the 1870s would have wiped the town out. And what they did was stick the family in their home, and they built an 8-foot palisade around the house. Fed them through a hole in the fence, and the woman died. Unbelievably, the husband and child and servant didn't. But they couldn't even risk bringing her body down through the town to the cemetery. So you'll find her grave now in Walhalla. It's right up on the top of the hill, up near the cricket ground. She was buried in a 10-foot hole in a lead coffin. Because they just didn't dare risk it. And when they let the family out after a quarantine period, does any of this sound familiar? They burned the house down. They burned everything. So the family literally walked out naked, and they burned everything down. And not only that, at the same time, they were also bringing in vaccinations. Like the entire town was vaccinated. And as a corollary of all that, that's also when I discovered that Australia had plague in the early 20th century. So that was an interesting little rabbit hole to go down to. I think I'm aware a couple of people have actually used that in recent books. I can't think of what they are off the top of my head, but start going down these rabbit holes and you find all sorts of. But it just amazed me that in 1870, here were these doctors, these town doctors, doing exactly what we in 2021 are doing: isolation, quarantine. vaccination.
Were you writing that during when we had COVID, or
No, I wrote it. It was
came in?
written before that.
Yeah.
It came out in July. Like, it came out the day after Melbourne went into lockdown too. So yes, no, I was writing that in complete oblivious. Oh, isn't life wonderful? This is never going to happen to us.
Yeah. And could you tell us a bit? People are interested to know what you're working on at the moment.
I am hard at work on the third Maidens Creek story, so that will wind up those stories as a trilogy. I've had a bit of a hard year apart from all the COVID and lockdowns and everything else. Personally, it's been a bit of a difficult year. So I'm on an extension of an extension, just between you and I in the Gate Post. So it's going to be a little late getting out. So probably more towards the end of next year, you'll see that. And it's going very slowly, I have to say. It's just I found writing during lockdown very, very hard. Surprisingly, you think we would train for it, but what do we have? 267 days of lockdown, and it just saps you. You're there at a blank screen. So yes, it's been a tough year, and my writing's been slow, but it's coming on, and it takes the story forward 20 years. And picks up on two characters, one who appears in The Postmistress and one in The Gold Miner's Sister. And if anybody's read both of those, they might have a guess as to who the two characters are. If I said there were children in those books. So I'm enjoying being back with them and actually bringing that whole sort of series arc to an end.
Yeah. And was it hard not being able to travel to the location as well?
Yeah, I found it very hard. Although I was extremely lucky, literally lucky, in that I managed to get to Walhalla in May. And I was driving down the Princess Highway coming home on the Wednesday as Daniel Andrews was announcing we were going into lockdown 4, I think at the time. I haven't been back since, but hopefully I will be in the new year. We'll get back there. So yes, I've been very frustrating, just sort of not being able to go anywhere really.
Yeah.
I'm going up to the Murray this weekend. There might be a paddle spinner story.
Yeah. And what about the Singapore series?
That's an interesting point. I've just finished the major edits for that one, for the third one of that, and we're in negotiation about a fourth book at the moment, which will wind that series up. Sadly, I would like it to keep going, but I think my publisher is making noises that makes me think that perhaps it I should bring it to an end.
Yeah.
It's been good fun to write. I've really enjoyed that. So sorry if there's any Harriet and Robert fans out there, but I'm sure we'll work something out. There will be a fourth book, but I'm not sure when.
No. Yeah. And then, so when you've finished like 2 series that you've been doing, it must be quite difficult maybe to try and work out what's going to be next.
Yeah, it is. My life has changed. I'm that classic meat in the sandwich, the generational sandwich now, and I've got a very elderly mother who's now in aged care, and at the other end of the scale, I've got 4 grandchildren, and I'd like to spend more time with them. So, so finishing the Singapore series would actually suit me quite well in that I can then I can then really sit back and think, well, what is it I actually want to keep writing? And I think I'd really like to keep writing Australian stories. I think as Australians, we like seeing stories written in our own voices, about our own history, bringing our own history to life. So, never say never, but we'll see. The interest. I had really good feedback on my one little regency that I've written, which was Lord Somerton's Heir, which is the one out at the moment. So look, I'll have a chat to HarperCollins and see what they want, really.
Yeah. Well, but yes, good luck with all that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And I'm wondering what you hope readers will love about your books.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I think the feedback I get from readers is that they love my characterizations, that I create real people that they can identify with. And I mean, not just the primary characters as well, because my secondary cast is as important to me as the primary cast. You can't have two actors just sitting on a stage without people around them to interact with and to bounce off. And so I do try and create. And I think that's the beauty of writing historical stories is to set people who people can identify with in historical situations to see how they would have reacted, what exactly the ordinary person was going through at the time. So I hope that's what readers take away from my stories. And yeah, I like a bit of dare and do and a bit of action. And my romances are more sort of historicals with romance rather than classic historical romances. I do like a bit of plot, and people die. Lots of people die, including beloved secondary characters. Sorry about that one.
And do you have a favourite place to write?
Yeah, I have several places I like to write. I've this is my workspace now, which I have actually only created this year, when I realised it was very silly having a spare room that nobody slept in, when it was actually a nice room for me to write in. So I've swapped that with my room upstairs. I'm really, really happy I can look out of the window and see. But I actually really like writing in the libraries as well. I call them my second and third office, so the State Library and even my local library when it ever opens again, when they ever let people back in. I can work much more focused in that sort of, without the distraction of the fridge and and a husband working from home and a cat.
And are you someone who likes to share as you write?
No, I'm a pretty solitary writer from that point of view. I have an absolutely fabulous writers group, but it's not a critique group. We will brainstorm. If I can go into our Facebook group and go, blah blah blah. What am I going to do? Blah 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 blah. And actually, just writing it often sort of solves the problem. And they'll come back with fantastic suggestions. But we don't tend to share our writing much between ourselves. And I've never found that works for me very well. Everybody's different. But I find I'm better to work in my own space. Otherwise, I've got too many voices in my head. No, and I'm also blessed now with having really good editors. So they're pretty quick to make me rewrite.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me and for coming back to our group again. It's been great chatting to you.
No, thank you, and it's a great group, and I'll pop into the Facebook group probably tomorrow, and if there's anybody's got any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. So don't feel shy about putting anything down.
No, thanks for that, and thanks for the people who did ask questions. We had some good questions. Thanks.
Very good questions. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.